de Energía y Geostrategia.
Good morning. Welcome to our Energy and Geostrategy meeting. It's a pleasure to have you here at our offices, and I would like to greet Juan Francisco Martinez Núñez and thank him for coming. And the study related to Energy Day is a key factor of world strategy. And we're fully aware that now more than ever, everything related to energy, this is one of the most important axes within the international panorama. So we are now like to start this very important meeting. The first session will have Antonio Brufau, who is the president of Repsol, the Íñigo Díaz de Espada, the president of CIEMAT. Then we have the president of the Spanish Club for Energy, Mr. Jordi García Tabernero. And then we have Juan Francisco Martínez, the admiral, who comes from the Ministry of Defense. I would like to remind you that if you would like to make a mention in social media, the hashtag is NRJO23, as you can see at the bottom of the screen. And so I would like to ask the panel members for the first session to come up to the stage, please.
Bueno, buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. The Admiral, the General Secretary of the Defense Project, the Director of the National Defense Studies, the General Director of the Spanish Strategic Studies, the President of the Spanish Energy Club, the President of the Spanish Committee of the World Energy Council, and ladies and gentlemen, for me it's a great satisfaction to welcome you here today to our headquarters yet another day to present the publication Energy and Geostrategy 2023. It is a very special occasion for us, and we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of this publication. So I would like to thank absolutely everyone for their support over the last 10 years, from Enerclub, the Spanish Committee of the World Energy Club, the Spanish Institute of Strategy Study, all authors and collaborators, and also our readers. Throughout this time, we have done very hard work to provide content that is of good quality, of a report that gives you information, inspires after everything related to energy and geostrategy. Along the way, we have created a community that is very passionate and very committed. A year has gone by since our last meeting. It's been a very important time in our geostrategic world because there's been important events have taken place worldwide. Finally, we have left behind the COVID-19 pandemic, and the response of the governments has allowed quite, should we say, quick end to the pandemic, which affected the relationship between countries. Now we have new dynamics when we're fighting for world leadership. Secondly, a year has gone by since the Ukraine invasion by Russia, which has generated lots of different situations of violence and has directly affected thousands of people. Apart from the loss of lives, it's had a negative financial impact, which can now be seen as an increase in the price of energy, and it has shown how we have considerable problems related to European energy sources. So now Europe needs to review in a very thorough manner this strategy, guaranteeing not just sustainability, but also the security of supply and the financial accessibility to everyone. Thirdly, the tension between the United States and China has increased considerably over recent times. In August, the United States approved the law to reduce inflation, the so-called IEEE, and there's over 370 billion euros for clean energy, climate change, and energy security. And so it has a strategic advantage that China has compared to the rest of the world, and which has invested considerably. This law says that there is a clear framework for investors for the next 10 years, and there is a lot of neutrality and technology implications. Now we are facing an important challenge with regard to the position on the global panorama. So if we look at the pace of how things are going between China and the United States, and then we're looking to see who's going to have the leadership but is necessary for these things. So there is a transformation required within our globalization model. And at the moment, we are redefining this. And it has been affected by an important lack of stability and a social discontent in lots of different areas of the world. This situation is very different depending on the geographical position of countries that are very far away from us. And also on our closest neighbors have been affected, for example, France, who have experienced over the last few months a lot of social tension, which has been very obvious. We can see down the breakdown between the relationship between the Maghreb countries and the very fast propagation of terrorism in the Sahara area. And so this represents an imminent threat for Europe. So there's lots of different events that have taken place in Europe which cause an impact on energy. So therefore it says there is a very close relationship between geostrategy and energy. This publication offers us the opportunity to go into greater depth in the details, and there's different relationships between both these concepts. Therefore, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the authors and the coordinator, which is the excellent Mr. Claudio Anza, for his dedication and commitment, which is truly exemplary. And I don't want to go any further, but as I said before, I would like to give you a very warm welcome today, and I hope you enjoy a very interesting and productive session. So without further ado, I would like to give the word to Íñigo Díaz Baldo, who is the Spanish chairman of the CECME.
Buenos días a todos.
Welcome everyone. Admiral General Secretary of the Defense Policy, the Lieutenant General from the Spanish Institute of Defense, and also the Spanish Energy Club and friends. I would like to thank you very much for coming along to this presentation for Energy and Geostrategy 2023. And as we've said, this year it's our 10th edition. And I would like to start offering my thanks very especially to our strategic partner over all these years, the Spanish Institute of Strategic Studies, and also their General Francisco José Tapia, and also his predecessor in the presidency, which was Mr. Miguel Ángel Ballesteros, and all the people at the Institute who help us in this work. On a day like today, I would like to remind all the people who have generated this document, and especially the first editions, the President of CIECMAT, Mr. Arturo Gonzalo, and Berta Camacho, who is the General Secretary. And of course, I'd like to thank our dear Claudio Aranzabi, who has been the coordinator at the very beginning. He's been the true heart and soul of this publication, and this is why it is so important today. This work and all the members of the committee, the Enerclub and our sponsors, especially Repsol, who have welcomed us here today at their headquarters, and all the authors who have written in our publication since the first edition. And there was too many, I'm afraid, to be able to mention today. Today is a special edition for all of us who are part of this project, not just because it's 10th anniversary, but also it's been developed in parallel to the most important events in the geopolitics over the recent times, which is the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, which has caused a global energy crisis, and especially in Europe for the reasons that we all know. A crisis with a very uncertain horizon, and we still don't know how it's going to end up. So we do think there's going to be important infrastructure changes in international relationships with very deep effects on our sector. So competitiveness, sustainability, etc. And for many years they have been leading the World Energy Plan. So now they are the center of all debates. And so it's very obvious how urgent it is to unify all these three issues. And so as we say, we have the energy crisis and the war. So this year it means that we've included 5 chapters. The first chapter is related to the effects of energy shocks in the national economies, and it offers information about the great impact of the cost of a very essential resource like energy and how it affects all the different economies. There's another chapter which is a call to attention. We're not just exposed to the risk of depending on big countries who export energy like Russia, but also for countries like China who have a majority of the manufacturing industry, and that is where a lot of the critical minerals come from. So when we're talking about future strategies, we should be very careful of not replacing certain dependencies with other dependencies. And other chapters relate on specific geographical areas that should be looked at carefully when we're talking about the current energy situations and to see the role that they could have in the future relating to areas where they offer energy. And I'm talking about the Caucasus area and Latin America. I think it's essential to ensure that our dialogue, the geostrategic dialogue with these regions is taken very seriously. And that we have to work on shared priorities, which could be the energy transition or the security of supply. The publication includes 2 chapters which analyze in specific energy technologies. One, the renewable technologies, and the other one, nuclear energy. One of the factors which will condition our ability to balance the 3 elements of this energy dilemma, which is the technological development and innovation, the strategies and the different paces that each country goes along will go as geopolitical and competitive issues, and we should be careful to look at those. And there is an interview at the end, the interview of Teresa Rivera, who is the Minister of Energy here in Spain. So once again, thank you all very much for this project, and I hope that we will be having this publication in very many years to come. So I would now like to give the floor to Jordi García Tabernero, who's the Vice President of the Spanish Energy Club.
Buenos días a todo el mundo.
Good morning, everyone. The Admiral, the General Secretary of the Defense Policy, the Lieutenant General who is from the School of the Armed Forces, and also the President of Repsol, the President of the Spanish Committee of the World Energy Council, authorities and friends. For me, it's a true honor as the president of the Spanish Energy Club to be here in the presentation of this doc, which is called Energy and Geostrategy 2023, and to do this on such a very important date, which is today on its 10th anniversary. I would like to start by thanking everyone like Glario Marto and the entire team who have made this possible, and I would also like to congratulate each and every one of the people who each year make this project possible. Since the Spanish Institute of Strategic Studies has been involved, and the Spanish Energy Club, since they met in the year 2013 for the very first time to start this magnificent study. It's a project that started with the objective of promoting the collaboration between public and private entities, and also to have some sort of continuity, which of course has been achieved, and also it's something that's able year after year to be able to detect the most important issues on the international arena. And it's very important for Enerclub because it includes a different view, a very broad view of the energy world, and it allows our association to be open to the whole world and to get to know a more global reality. The energy world cannot be understood without the world of geostrategies, and it's always been like that. They're very closely related, but with the different crises that have taken place and ones that we experience today with the invasion of Ukraine, well, it is now more obvious. I think it's very important to ensure that this project has many more additions after today. It's a very interesting project, and I would like to give you 3 very important ideas. One is the ability that the European Union to have and the member states to work on the necessary adjustment of the energy systems with the objective of reducing the dependence on Russia. Also, this has been done in a very streamlined manner, very quickly, and with a capacity for consensus that was very high. In this respect, Spain has played a very important role and has demonstrated how it has a very important role to play in the different solutions. In the Spanish representative, this 6 months will be the president of the European Union, and it will show everything that our country can contribute to Europe. And so from our Energy Club, we're going to give as much support as possible to this. The second idea is that of unity and challenges. Now more than ever, we're very convinced that we have to accelerate this transition, not just for climate or environmental reasons, but also for issues related to security of supply, which until now had never been talked about in such an emphatic manner as we have done over the last few months. And of course, issues related to competitiveness. This was mentioned before by Inigo. This is something that we know as we call the energy trilemma, which is security of supply, sustainability related to the environmental issues, as well as the cost of energy, which can be paid by citizens and company. So we say it's essential for society to understand and becomes involved in this issue. More than ever now, we need citizens to understand the reason why the decisions are made in this sector that's so complex and so difficult, which is the energy sector, and that there are not just one simple solution to this. So communication is very important. We all need to use a common language. We need to be very transparent, and we all need to believe in each other. So the Spanish Energy Club, with energies like Energeo, so where we can connect the national and international news, and we carried out joint analysis which contribute and help us to find solutions for these challenges. And this helps us to fulfill this role of transparency and trust. And to do this, we firmly support and we expect, as I said before at the very beginning of my speech, that we can continue to collaborate for many more years to come. I would like to congratulate everyone, and now I would like to give the floor to the Admiral, the General Secretary of the Defense Policy, Juan Francisco Martínez Núñez. And first of all, I'd like to thank him for having made time in his very busy general agenda to be with us here today.
Presidente de
Chairman of Repsol, the chairman of the Spanish Committee of the World Energy Council, the vice president of the Spanish Energy Club, good friends and colleagues, and everyone who is part of this panel, Mr. Aranzadi, the general manager of the CSD, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, everybody. Well, apparently, we are in a very comfortable place, and we all feel wonderful sitting here in the audience. But sociologically and psychologically speaking, we are sitting in a very difficult place. So we feel that the sword is here affecting us, and we feel that between the sword and a wall, and what do we need? We need more energy to be able to progress, for our welfare, our security, and for our daily lives. It's a situation which at the moment, as has already been said, this is affecting us psychologically and physiologically, and we think that there would be, have solutions on the medium term, because between a rock and a hard place. And so we're undergoing this transition to be able to change from the consumption of fossil fuels and change it to be used with a package. It's a new package, and as friends of the environment, it consists of non-contaminating resources. And it seems that nuclear fusion and hydrogen will have a very important role to play. And like all transitions, we are undergoing times of uncertainty. So the end of fossil fuels will require a lot of enormous research. And this will cause political tensions, geopolitical tensions, which are in addition to the ones that we already have. And we're seeing this on a daily basis. So taking into account all these different tensions, I think will be shown in our first sessions by General Tcol and Victor Bath. They will be talking about this in the next session. So the countries who base their economies, which are highly dependent on fossil fuels, they don't know if they're going to manage to change their models, their financial models, in time. And in addition to that, there is potential situation whereby, well, it can be considered a paradox, the fact that, well, I don't know anything about the futures market, but I think it would be something that the fact that we now are aware of a future reduction of the fossil fuels requirements will mean that you will be investing less in the extraction, and this can also create a lot of bottlenecks, and there will be a lot of things will be missing, or there won't be sufficient as we go along the way. But there are lots of other factors involved too. So the role of the defense will have a lot more to do with the transformation of the armed forces to adapt to climate change and also to the management of the conflicts that may arise. To reform the energy model for the armed forces is a very important challenge. For over 1.5 centuries, it hadn't been carried out. At the end of the 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, was the last time when we changed the way our boats were propelled, all the vessels were built, and then, of course, the way that we fight on the land. So fossil fuels and how we use all this energy is not easy at all. So all these supplies are being threatened, and the consumption for every fighting unit is very high. All this has to be done taking into account the threat of someone who's an opponent. Each day we see this, and we've seen how that Russia has attacked the energy infrastructures in the Ukraine. So with regard to that, together with other several big Spanish companies, I would like to thank especially the company that has invited us here today, Repsol, for their generosity when we've asked for help to, well, as I say, to align the energy problems in some cities and hospitals and in old age people's homes in the Ukraine. Earlier we were talking about how difficult it is to supply fuel in our operations, but also when we're on peace missions. And even though the military consumption of fuels is a very small part compared to the industrial consumption of energy or what the citizens use, but in specific circumstances it can be very important. Our first solutions to transform the armed forces is to reduce the consumption of equipment and systems, and the consumptions of the main, should we say, vessels, planes, tanks, is all related to how much they consumed a few decades ago, and they've still improved. But it's not the individual consumption of all our equipment, but what we need now is a complete revolution in these changes. Evolution that changes the way we have to operate and to learn all about this, because also at the moment we're normally in times where we prepare, we study, and we're in times of peace, and that is also times when we have a lot of consumptions. We have a lot of expectations in the digital simulation systems, which is one of the most standout is what we call the digital twin, which allows us to have a better training, more in-depth symbiosis on the battlefield. But you have to be very aware that this simulation is really not sufficient. It is not sufficient to replicate the conditions of how difficult one of our operating situations are, because it cannot reproduce all the situations we have to face. So we still need to work on this. So Spain, at the end of October, we are going to house the first training course for the fast deployment corps. And we saw this in the Sudan and a very sad evacuation process in Afghanistan. We've seen how important it is, and we're trying to focus this on a very key element, which is to reduce the energy that is associated to the use of this force. And something else I'd like to mention, we know through history there has also been a lot of comparisons between the different tensions that exist in the world, but we've been very decisive because when there's confrontation between the different platforms and the different networks, in a simplified way, we look at the platforms. These systems are normally very big, they're complex systems, they're very expensive systems. You know, if you look at one of our fleets or a submarine, or if we look at one of our tanks or a 5th generation aircraft. So we can include changes relatively easily, and we can update the new scenarios, which are these platforms. And so these So we say these are situations where we have to be very flexible with regard to how we're going to be using all these different systems. There are moments in time where we have what we call these hives, and the other times when we have platforms. At the end of the 19th century, as I say, 130 years in the past, there was when the torpedoes were invented, and we had these torpedo launchers, and they represented a great threat for our tanks. But the tanks still exist, and many years later, we have what we have, should we say, these battleships or these armored vehicles. Today, the conflicts like Ukraine are focusing yet again on all these different networks, which is artificial intelligence, robotics, which give us this omnipresent universal principles of these non-tripulated drones, the unmanned drones. But probably it would be very risky to support everything on this particular network. Previously, we were having a coffee, and I was talking to several people from the area of Bilbao, and normally they're very good card players, and they know that, you can't always win. So to make a balance between a platform and a network, well, what does this mean? It means that, well, with regard to what we're talking about today, I don't want to go off the issue. What are we talking about? Energy saving. The platforms consume a lot more than these different systems. Well, all this should take us to reductions in the reduction of fossil fuels, and also it can lead us, and I think Victor's already mentioned this as well as Inigo in his few words. This can lead us to a new camp of prisoners where they are camping along with lots of other entities, which means that there's another added risk factor, another bottleneck, and geopolitical tensions. And so the energy transition of the armed forces is up and running, and it gives us this special benefits. I don't know if this is the right time to ask for help. 17th of March last year, let me read you the headlines. The directive of the Ministry of Defense for actions with regard to climate change. They assigned a person who is called CIEMAT, and he was asked to coordinate this. And so please, the first thing I would like to ask you and to Mr. General Jacoba, Mr. Anastasiou, and Victor, in the next study, could you please take this into account with all these different ideas? We have our ideas, but we do think that it would be good for everyone else to have ideas, because the armed forces are very open to receive any suggestions and ideas from the people here today. We need you, because the armed forces obviously are totally part of this energy transformation, but we need to do this offering full guarantee of the security of our citizens, and we will contribute to this with innovative ideas and measures, and very careful ones, because we never want them to represent any bad negative effects on national defense.
Muchas gracias a nuestros panelistas en la sesión.
Thank you so much to our speakers. And now, before we move on to the second part of the event, we would like to share a video with you. It's an anniversary video, okay?
Bueno, pues damos ahora inicio a la segunda parte.
Now we start the second part of this event. We engage in dialogue with the Director of Strategic Studies, Francisco José da Cova. Please join us on the stage. Thank you. Welcome. General, it is mandatory to start off discussing Ukraine. Last year, only a few weeks have gone by since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So where are we now? Can we start considering negotiation table to start discussing peace? Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to come one more year to this home, which we feel it as our home. So as you say, this year has been a very intense year. A year ago, we were still impacted and shocked by the invasion, and everything that was ahead of us was uncertain as well as open. And since there has been a failure in the fast victory and on the part of Moscow, Russia, and due to the resistance of Ukraine, we had, as I say, a reaction on the part of Ukraine, and Ukraine recovered part of the territory that had been occupied, also recovered Kharkov and Kherson, which is the capital city of Oblast that had been occupied by Russia. And then we reached wintertime. At wintertime, operations were slowed down. They were not stopped by slowdown. And after having significant losses on both sides, we are not well aware of the numbers, but we are sure that numbers are really high. And the parties also took part of that opportunity to recover and also to correct some of the tactical mistakes that they had made. In this context, I would like to highlight two aspects, two of the things that Russia did in winter. First of all, persistent destruction campaign of Ukraine infrastructures. Of course, that has long-term repercussions. And also something which is not much discussed, which is yet very relevant, that is to say that Russia has strengthened the land and to create barriers to protect the forces. This is very important as in view of the Ukraine counteroffensive, counterattack, that previous tasks carried out by Russia could make it very, very difficult for Ukraine to carry out counterattack. So Ukraine has kept the line of contact so that to prevent Russia from moving forward. And so the last thing that we have seen is the tanks. And now I think we are at the forefront of the new summer and autumn campaign in Ukraine. What may have happened, we just don't know. And probably this is bad news. Perhaps comebacks will restart. We will continue to have significant losses, and perhaps variations on the field would not be highly significant. So therefore, we are likely to have an autumn with people that are really devastated forces and wishful thinking. Well, perhaps negotiations will come. Surely, negotiations will come someday, sometime, but most likely they will not take place soon. By the time negotiations will take place, being realistic, I think that best case scenario is that there will be a ceasefire, and there have been already some agreements for exchange of prisoners. Perhaps there will be more freedom of movement in terms of humanitarian aid, coming back of displaced people. But as of there, a new phase will start that will be indefinite in time, as there are very, very many red lines. If we are talking about territory, Crimea is a red line for opposite reasons for both sides, or Donbass, or the full provinces that are attached to. We would need to start talking about war crimes, reconstruction of Ukraine, and what is most important, then the status of Ukraine will need to be reconsidered, rethought regarding Europe, and also security guarantees for Ukraine, not through the joining of NATO, which no one considers to take place in the short or mid-term, yet Ukraine will need to have security guarantees that should come or will come from the Western world. And also, we should also think about Russia. There will never be security in Europe if Russia is not taken into consideration, because Russia is Europe. So therefore, we have the strategic concept that was recently approved in Madrid, that this time, this new strategic concept says that the North Atlantic area, again, is not in peace. So we are building up a security infrastructure, structure against Russia. And I wish that sometime we will build that up jointly with Russia. This is a crystal ball exercise. We need to watch events closely. And once we just don't know what will happen. So the main concern in Europe is Ukraine. Ukraine is very close to Europe. Is there any international event that we should be concerned about as well? Yes, well, it was mentioned before. What concerns us the most is Ukraine, of course, because that has a direct impact on us as Europeans. Therefore, we can say that Ukraine is the most urgent topic. As the continuation of the conflict continues to increase international tensions, as well as the structures and infrastructures of Europe. Our response so far has been impeccable, but there will be a new round of sanctions. There will have different positions from different institutions, Brussels institutions, of course, energy impacts, financial impacts. So therefore, we just don't want the war to continue, not at all, for very many reasons. So therefore, Ukraine becomes the most important, the most urgent, yet it is not the most important. As you mentioned, there is a player which is present everywhere, which is the China. China is present in Africa, in Iberoamerica, in the Middle East. Former foreign Minister of China hosted the restoration of diplomatic relations of Iran and Peking, not in Washington. Notice that China is in the region where we have the Taiwan, and also China Sea, North Korea. Also, we are seeing relationships between South Korea and Japan. We also have enhanced relations on the part of UK with Vietnam and the Philippines. They are going back to different agreements, four-way agreements. So China is present in cyberspace, in the outer space. China is a big economic power, big geopolitical power, and more military power. And China, even if it's still in some aspects far away from the US, so let us say it is the only power that can speak face-to-face with, on an equal footing with US. But China is not alien to Ukraine either. When Putin went to Peking 4th February last year, due to the opening of Winter Olympic Games, well, Putin went to China to tell his good friend President Xi what was latest before the imminent invasion of Ukraine. Why is China paying so much attention to Russia? Well, big powers are not alien to these challenges, and China, same as any other player, wants to defend their interests in this scenario. China wants to maintain the trade relationships with Europe, and the war could jeopardize that. And China does not want to have an absolute defeat of Russia because of the strategic relationship that they had had for many years, which is more and more advantageous for China. As a result of the war, Russia is more reliant on China, and China wants to be present in the reconstruction of Ukraine, which sooner or later will take place. Well, even if this is a bit simplistic or too much of a summary, and perhaps not 100% accurate, let us say that Ukraine is the most urgent, but China, together with the US, is the most important. Well, other than the urgent and important, is there any other hot point in the world that perhaps is passing unnoticed to us and that we should not overlook? Well, there are many hot points. And of course, it is clear that all our attention is focused on Ukraine and Russia. We should not overlook China. We also mentioned other concerning scenarios in the world. We are Spaniards, therefore members of the Southern European group, and we are and we continue to be solidary to our Eastern Europe allies as we share their concerns or the willingness to resolve the big crisis of Ukraine. And because we have been solidary, we'll continue to be solidary. We should also not forget that our neighboring countries are also of concern to us. So the North Africa region, Sahel region, and Crimea Gulf are having wars and conflicts. Libya, Sahel, Togo, Benin, countries that were kind of far away from jihadist wave are back to conflicts. So therefore, we should repeat, South also exists, that has also been included in the strategic concepts. From the South to say, okay, let us move from words to action, and let us be aware that stability of the region that I mentioned is relevant for our stability, but not only for Southern European countries, but also for the whole of Europe, as it is the case in Ukraine. So thank you very much for your thoughts, for your insights about the reality that we're facing every day. We would like to thank you for your presence, and well, we look forward to having you again with us next year. Thank you.
Bueno, buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everyone. In the last part of today's session, so we will be talking about the report, our 10th Energy and Geostrategy report. We have followed the same structure of than in previous reports. As Inigo mentioned before, in this report, we include an interview with a relevant figure in the world of energy. In this year's report, the interview has been held with the Vice President of the government and also Minister for Ecological Transition, and also with members of the armed forces. And this year, there are three thematic areas: nuclear energy, renewable fuels, discussed by Berta Cabello, and also Trevor Tombe from the Calgary University. He's in charge of the chapter about impact of energy prices on international economy. And we will briefly discuss the methodology that he uses to analyze the energy trading movement, and also two chapters on the space, one about the Caucasus area that was in charge of Felipe Sánchez Tapia, and then another chapter about energy strategy in Latin America, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, and Argentina. Our speakers will address in Spanish, with the exception of Trevor Tombe. We can all address Trevor in Spanish during the Q&A, and he will answer in English. Before I give the floor to the authors and co-authors, every year I make a recap of the relevant events that have taken place in the world or in the field of energy and geostrategy. I will briefly discuss some of them, as many have already been pointed out. Well, I will refer to some of them that are kind of, a bit controversial and which are good to generate a debate. First of all, and as been mentioned before by General Tcol, the effects on the geopolitical aspects of the Ukraine war. The first controversial aspect is the potential impacts of the war of Ukraine in energy transition. I'm saying that this is controversial as there are two different approaches, opposite approaches. First of all, we have the optimistic one by Fatih Birol. He's the DG of Energy, and he said that would be highly positive, as this will promote the investment of decarbonizing technologies that would also promote and foster energy transition. And then there is another negative outlook. Well, energy security. We have talked about the energy trilemma before, and so therefore, given what priority to energy security is translated into an increase on the use of fossil fuels. Germany and China have increased prices of fossil fuels. They have increased the use of coal, and they continue to use coal for power. So we also have the case of the US. We have the Inflation Reduction Act promotes clean development of clean technologies, but US has also increased explorations of gas and oil. But if we want to achieve carbon reduction emissions, no more gas and oil explorations, will take place. So therefore, if both things will take place, there will be an overcapacity. So therefore, either the decarbonizing objectives are not met, or there will be challenges, investments, for instance, with regard to coal power plants in Asia. So, which is very dangerous to give that to the Chinese and to the Indians, telling them to close down or to phase out coal power plants, to close them, to speed up the phasing out. That will be very, very challenging. Well, most likely, a mix of both things will happen. Yet a future problem regarding regulation opens up. Another topic which is associated to the energy impact of the war on Ukraine that can be discussed is the deglobalization, defragmentation approach, decoupling. Will it continue to increase? Will be halted? What will happen there? We just don't know. There will be decoupling, uncoupling of energies. It is clear, we are all clear about that. This is due to sanctions levied on Russia. There will continue to be an uncoupling, energy uncoupling, but not only from the viewpoints of supply flows, but also from the technological viewpoints. US is supporting an industrial policy which fosters in-home facilities. Sharing also takes to distribution of industrial facilities. And Europe is trying to react not only through a defensive strategy as high as that of the US, but we are seeing that China is already ahead in many of decarbonizing technologies and also control of critical materials. There may be a coupling. When that happens, when we are talking about rare earths, China controls the production of mining and processing of rare earths, cobalt, nickel, lithium. China controls not the mining there, but the processing of those rare minerals, or rare earth minerals. So there are those who say that everything will go back on track, but I do think that logistics of supplies and delocation of facilities will also be associated with another controversial aspect, which are sanctions. Having sanctions rightly structured, well, there is an interesting data regarding Russia. Russia has increased its revenues, well, because the demand has gone down, or supply has gone down, and then prices have gone up. I'm not talking about financial sanctions and long-term sanctions regarding making Russia or harming Russia from the viewpoint of revenue. Russia has not been impacted.
There are very important factors, and I'm going to be very quick about them, and they refer to the differences that exist internally within Europe, which are caused to a certain extent, or they're made more patent by the Ukraine war and the energy crisis that has taken place due to the war. The interventions in prices, well, not everyone has done the same thing in Europe. There have been difference of opinions relating to this. The concept related to the reform program of the electric industry, despite the program which was presented by the European Commission, which is there was no unanimous vote at all related to that. So we've seen a lot of different divisions between the optimal mix in the energy sector, and also there's a controversy about the use of nuclear energy. But I think we'll probably be able to talk about this during our debate. So, what is the strategy related to promoting hydrogen? Well, there's big difference in opinions there. And what sort of hydrogen are we talking about? We have to obviously look at the development of that and how we're going to focus the promotion of infrastructures for a hydrogen market. What horizons are we considering? And the European Commission has thought about the progress in hydrogen unrealistic. But this is another subject that we can say there's a lot of difference of opinions related to that issue. But these are just suggestions of things that I think, well, I don't necessarily want to say they're in conflict, but should we say that there's a lot of controversy related to them, and I'm sure they'll come up during our debate. Anyway, without further ado, I'm now going to start talking and giving the floor to the different authors, the 5 of them who are here today, and they've had an important part in this edition of our report. Like other years, the system will be following. I am going to ask each one of the authors a question, not so that they give a summary of their work, because you will see you'll be able to see the summary in the book that you will be given as we leave. But there are other timely issues which are very interesting. And as I say, we're not giving them a lot of time to develop their suggestions and ideas. So now, let's move on to this part of our presentation. And we're talking now about nuclear issues, which was the article written by Cayetano. Cayetano, obviously, most of your presentation related to nuclear fusion. However, there's one issue that you don't spend so much time on, but it's also very important, which Jacob talked about with the nuclear fusion. To what extent do you think nuclear fusion is part of an objective that can be reached as an alternative? And what is the degree of realism in relation to the announcement made in the United States with the progress? And I'm sure you were there at the thing. You were at that organization at the time, the CIEMAT. And so what do you think about the possibilities offered by nuclear fusion? Well, have you said? Well, first of all, Claudia, thank you very much for asking me to be here to participate and in the drafting of the report with regard to this issue. Well, I tend to talk about nuclear fusion, but it's not unique. There are different technologies. But I think this is the one that currently is being used, and it produces energy which can be sold. Fusion is a project. The technology of the fusion is diabolic. So, for my scientific information, I'm interested in things like, which is, this fission and the fusion. But I think that to master this technology in a systematic way so that it has an impact on industry, I think it's a long way away. I'm convinced that it will be mastered. I'm sure this technology will be mastered, but I am reasonably convinced that I won't see it. I think what we will need is at least a generation, or maybe more than one generation, to see it working fully. ITER, which is a world project, which all the big countries in the world participate with an enormous investment, is just an experiment, which is an experiment which is prior to the design of a new, should we say, reactor. It hasn't started yet, but we haven't started doing experiments. We think they'll take about 15 years to do these ITER experiments. And the only thing we've tried to demonstrate is that energy that you get from the fusion reactions of the plasma is, when we're talking about 1 to 10, it's above the energy that is put into the plasma. But 10 is not much, because that energy comes out as calories, and then when it's transformed into electricity, you divide it then by 3, and all energy that is used in the plasma is just a part of the energy necessary to keep the machine up and running. There are lots of experts that say this factor, it has to gain a lot more. But at the same time, you have to study a series of materials that at the moment are unknown. We don't know anything about them yet, and they have to be able to support radiation of the neutrons mainly, as well as the heat to extract them from the plasma chamber, and also to regenerate tritium, which is necessary for the fusion. This is so on the long term, it's an issue which is called IFMIF, which is an international project for fusion materials, whose prologue, which is the DONES project, which will be built in Granada, but they still haven't started. So it's a group of projects which are complicated, expensive, which I think will take a long time, and they will need a lot of investment. And there's a lot of, should we say, grey matter, because we need a lot of researchers to be working on this investigation. So these energy issues, I think, are urgent. They're very pressing. We cannot wait for 1 or 2 generations for them to bear fruit. So I think it's going to be very difficult for the fusion technology to have an impact immediately. I think it can on the long term, but not at the moment, which is when we need this transition very urgently. Well, thank you very much, Cayetano. Previously, I forgot something, like always. What I want to say is you can write your questions on the cards that have been handed out. You can just send them up to the front, so you don't have to wait to the end. So we can include these questions when our panel members are speaking. So Berta, let's move on to you. When we're now talking about renewables, which is another issue that has a lot of internal debate in the European Union, electrification, for example, the generation mix, clean generation mix, and also clean fuels. That's another alternative, both for industry and for transport. Could you talk a little bit about the role of synthetical fuels for transport? I'm talking about, well, probably better talk about renewables. Well, thank you very much, Claudia. It's a true honor to be able to participate in this panel session and to this book. And also, I would like, first of all, to explain what renewables are for all of those who don't know them. These are products which, for users, they can't make a big difference between them, between the traditional fuels and the renewable fuels, but the raw material they're made from is renewable. So what does this mean? It means that basically we use waste from animal, organic wastes, from, I don't know, from forest materials, or even things that are in the air, these synthetic materials. And hydrogen is also renewable because it comes from the renewable electrolysis of water and from waste themselves. And this means that they have a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions between 65% on a minimum to even up to 110, which represents emissions that are negative compared to traditional fuels. So I'm telling you this so that you know that the role the decarbonization in transport has is a key role, because they decarbonate all types of transport in an efficient and quick manner, because you don't have to change the vehicle fleet. You can use the logistics that exist at the moment, and they can continue to do the current work. So now, what's our objective that we're trying to achieve? And companies like my company, which is Repsol, we have to have all the different alternatives for renewables, and I'm convinced that they will be part of this new energy mix. So this leads us to security of supply. So this helps the security of supply, because currently, for the time being and for the future, because we're diversifying these different energy sources, using on many occasions sources that are domestic, and we're supporting the necessary use of waste matters. Well, as you know, as a country, we are not fulfilling the waste objectives that we have to fulfill from the European Union. So we have to work on this to try and achieve the goals. So I want to offer 2 examples, which I think will be easy to understand. One is the use of cooking oil can be used for the production of sustainable materials for aviation and diesel, and it's being used as a raw material in some places. In Cartagena, we have a new project which is going to be started in the end of the year, and they're using raw materials as this used cooking oil. And to a certain extent, we're avoiding, as we say, this oil that is used for frying. Well, it will also save our system related to drainage. So until recently, we depended from the imports of Russian diesel in the European Union for all these different types of use. Something that's very important is biomethane for the use of purines from the agricultural world. And we wanted to reduce 30% of natural gas. We have depended on Russia for many years for this biomethane, in Spain even more. I said there's the primary sector is very strong and it's very important. So at Repsol, we have a project in Galicia which will allow us to replace 5% of the natural gas demand in that region. And so these examples show us how this will help us to improve our security of supply. And also in the future, and I'm going to be very brief here, I think we've already talked about this, the dependence on the batteries, on materials related to the batteries. And if we focus only on electrification, well, these dependencies are going to be more critical. If we have a more diverse mix with using all the different alternatives, well, our scenario will be a lot better, obviously. And to end, I would just like to see, I think that technology is progressing considerably. There are things that still have to be seen, but I think as a country we have an opportunity to grow in the reuse of waste and in renewable hydrogen, which I think as far as employment is concerned and the creation of value is very important. And what we need ensure that we need a regulatory framework that is open, inclusive for all different technologies, and it doesn't limit any of these technologies at all. It would allow us to go along this path, trying everything out. Okay, well, just to end the first part, I would like to give the floor to Trevor. Tom, I assume, Trevor, that you are connected from Calgary. Would like to give you the floor, sir. And I would like to ask you a question. This is probably not related to the general way of what you've written about, but I think what you've written about is something very original, which is to take into account the analysis of the energy flows, the global energy flows, not just exports of energy directly, but rather the export of the energy that is used and included in other sectors. It's embedded within other parts. So we say there are different countries that even though, well, they don't have the energy resources, so they don't, but they are countries who export and import energy, and they export a lot of products which are energy intensive. Trevor, so if you're ready, sir, and if you can hear us from Calgary, would you please explain the methodology you use, which in my opinion is a very new methodology for the specific flows. And if you could give us an explanation of the pre-war, should we say, period, or when this could be seen. Thank you very much. You have the floor, sir.
Sure, thank you. And it's an honor to be a part of this panel and to contribute to the book. And thank you as well for the opportunity to join you virtually this morning from Calgary and to speak about how energy shocks can affect national economies. So as you noted, there's obviously direct effects of rising energy prices, and we've seen considerable increases in prices starting in 2021 and especially accelerating in 2022 following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But how such shocks affect national economies depends on a lot of factors, and the direct effects are pretty obvious. Consumers in Europe, for example, spending between 11 to 12% of their overall expenditures on electricity, gas, and fuel for homes, as well as operating personal vehicles, and so that contributes to inflation and so on. And even for producers, direct use of energy in certain sectors is substantial, and so increases in prices will decrease activity there. But as you note, I think one of the most important and least broadly recognized aspects of energy trade globally is the complex supply chains that propagate energy price changes throughout the economy, often in complex ways. So what I use is some methods that have been developed now for several years to look at global value chains, thinking about how value added in different economies are embedded in the goods and services that are traded internationally. And I apply the same method to energy. So I think it's not exactly an innovation, but I think it is novel in this chapter and yields some pretty interesting insight, I believe. So first, I find that only about 14% of total global energy use is actually consumed directly by households. The rest is embodied in the goods and services that we consume. 29% of the total is within the final goods that we as consumers directly consume. And that means that 57% of total energy use is embodied within inputs, or inputs of inputs, or inputs of inputs and of inputs, and so on up the supply chain. So you have to think about the entire chain in order to fully appreciate the scale of the impact of energy shocks. It also means that we need to think differently and more broadly about how countries are exposed to energy shocks. So most countries are affected, for example, by electricity price changes in China, despite not directly importing from it or that particular energy source. And indeed, I find that China is among the world's top energy exporters when you consider this embodied energy trade flow, accounting for about 18% of the total, where direct energy exporters like Saudi Arabia matter a lot less, only accounting for about 2%. So the source of energy shocks can be very different than what we usually have in mind. It also changes how we think about which sectors are exposed to energy shocks. Some like auto manufacturing, machinery and equipment production, or textiles. These are sectors that are actually much more energy intensive when you look at their entire supply chain than when you just look at direct energy used in production. Even some sectors like hotels and restaurants, they're nearly as energy intensive when you look at their full supply chain as the mining sector is in terms of its direct energy use. So we need to think more broadly about that. I also use some methods to try and quantify how countries are exposed to foreign energy shocks. And of course, some countries are net energy suppliers, where they export energy directly or a lot embodied in goods and services. North America in particular is a net supplier, but countries like Japan or continents like the European Union, these are economies that are very heavily reliant, more reliant than previous measures suggest, on imported energy when you look at all of those embodied flows. So I suspect I'm running short on time now, so I'll just note that as the world becomes increasingly uncertain and energy supplies more frequently disrupted, thinking about these broader interdependencies will be increasingly important for policymakers. So I'll end here and look forward to the conversation.
Muchas gracias, Trevor.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Well, now let's move on to the more territorial-focused issues. So we have the Colonel, Mr. Felipe Sánchez Tapia, who dedicates a chapter to the new geostrategic position after the Ukraine crisis, which is an area that we know very little about, which is the Caspian and the Caucasus area. And it would be an alternative supplier for Russia. So can you give us a bit more information about this Caucasian area, the Caucasus area? Yes, welcome everyone, and thank your team very much for allowing me once again to be here today to share here this work in public, and it's very interesting. And this year I talk about a region that it's not really of any new interest for the European Union, especially as far as energy is concerned, and this is the Caucasian Caspian area. And I will be I talk about the Caucasian area, but actually I'm talking about this very broad area that you can see here on the screen because it has a lot of hydrocarbons, especially the Caspian Basin itself, especially for oil and gas. Prior to the Ukraine war, this area supplied to the European Union more than 7% of the annual oil consumption and gas. These are not big amounts, but if you take into account that a majority of this supply goes specifically to specific countries, especially in the south and east of Europe, which is Bulgaria, Greece, and Italy. This is just to, shall we say, name the most important countries that import this. But in general, we could talk about the fact that oil is supplied to Europe from two, shall we say, origins, one from Kazakhstan and from Azerbaijan. And so it goes two ways. One way is through the pipelines, which go through the Russian Federation's Kazakhstan, and the others go through the Georgian territory and Turkey to the Mediterranean ports. And then they're distributed to the people who buy it. As far as the gas is concerned, there is one single supplier, which is Azerbaijan, and they supply to Europe via one of the gas corridors, which is a European project which was financed or supported by the European Union, and it will be fully functioning. Well, it started to be fully functioning in the year 2020, and it has three sections. One section that goes through the Caucasian area, and then it goes through the pipeline in the southern Caucasian area, and then we have another pipeline that goes through Turkey, and the last section that goes through Greece and Italy, which is the Trans-Adriatic pipeline. So the European interest due to the Ukraine war on this area has considerably gone up over the last year, and thanks to that, diplomatic activities, they've managed to sign agreements, especially with Azerbaijan a year ago, or maybe a little less, to double the amount of gas supplies that will be exported to European buyers. So we can go from 10 BCMs per month. So there's certain difficulties on a technical level related to this. On the one hand, due to production, there's a lot of analysts say that Azerbaijan, between now and the year 2027, which is the date that the European Union has established to double the amount of production, we don't think they will go above 14 BCMs that will be supported. So we think they will only be 50% above what they're currently exporting. But there's another important thing, which is the capacity of the gas corridor, which will be at 100% of its capacity. It's possible to extend and expand everything, but it will require time and investment. So I would like to make reference to the dichotomy that Claudio talked about related to the possible or possibilities to invest enormous amount in projects that could be really positive. So we're now talking about geopolitics, and here there are two factors that support this, Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan. As we said, these are the main suppliers of oil, and they're member of the OPEC+, which, as you know, they apply the policies to reduce the production, especially at the moment. They're 3.6 million barrels a day compared to the production in August in the year 2022. So, and they're going to maintain that to the end of this year. And it's not predictable for Kazakhstan or to Azerbaijan to change this consensus within the OPEC+ group, because they don't necessarily want to fulfill the requirements for increased production that the European buyers are interested in. But as we said, we've talked about the geopolitical aspects, and as far as Kazakhstan is concerned, almost all the exports to Europe goes through the Russian Federation. At the current time, it's being used on many occasions by the Federation route, and so they try and cut off the supply. They say it's for legal reasons or technical reasons, but basically they want to be very clear to Azerbaijan because they have got the key to allow. So they obviously have to allow the transport of this oil through their country. So this leads us to a very complex geopolitical situation on a regional level. And also it's framed within the current, well, the presence of Russia in the area, and also the Russian perspective, the Caucasian area, is part of the security belt. And as we say, when we talk about, we don't know whether Ukraine shares this opinion or not, but as a consequence, they are prepared in Russia to guarantee that their interests are respected in that part of the world. And in fact, they militarily intervened, if you can remember, in the year 2008, before they intervened in the Ukraine. So, as we say, the Ukrainian war is distracting the attention from this area, and so therefore it means there are interests for other regional powers and global powers to increase their presence and their influence in this particular area. Between the regional countries, I would say Turkey and Iran, as you can see on the screen, they are trying to occupy specific areas. And well, they're not actually empty areas. They look they're empty, but they're not. And they want to have strategic alliances. And they already have it with two countries in the area, Azerbaijan in the Turkey and Armenia in the Iran case. So both of these two countries have been at war for more than 2 decades. So therefore, this has stimulated the fact that global powers are interested in this area. And we've said European has interest in that. And they're not just limited to energy, but they're also worried or concerned about the connectivity, either east or west. May they be opening a new market in China from this area? And above all else, the United States. The United States are motivated geopolitically to intervene in this area. We consider that both the Caucasian area and the Caspian area towards Central Asia, well, behind that we have China and Russian involvement. And so what we need and what is interesting to be present in that area, any type, even military position. In fact, the United States are strengthening their military cooperation with all these countries in Central Asia. So if we now think about, we have a volatile, unstable situation which could replicate all the turbulences that we have seen and we are seeing, because there's big rivals between the big world powers. Claudia, well, this year, this chapter, like previous years, we haven't had a black swan. So therefore, I think, let us say a few months ago, we did include our information. It's still valid today. So I hope you find it interesting to read. Thank you very much.
Now moving on to another topic regarding alternative supply of gas and oil. I do think that you have a skeptical position regarding Latin American countries as suppliers of gas and oil to Europe. And so would you please tell us more about your position? Do you continue to be as skeptical as you were last year? So do you continue to share that view? So thank you very much, Minister, for giving me the opportunity to take part in this seminar. It is an honor to me to be here. Since when we finished our draft report end of January, I thought that perhaps by the time we will present the report, whether there would be any circumstances that would have impacted the contents of our report. When I looked into the topic, I could see that the efforts made by the EU in terms of finding alternative suppliers are more focused to Algeria or to the South Belt versus Ibero-American, and I wondered why. And that was what I researched on. When we carried out the research, the 4 countries that were researched, Mexico, Venezuela, Brazil, and Argentina, we can see that they have fully different circumstances. Starting off by the most northern one, Mexico says that exporting gas and oil is not suitable for them. It's not they say we are not going to buy oranges to sell oranges to buy orange juice. Regarding lifting of sanctions to Venezuela by the U.S., we are finding a different situation. In case of Brazil, oil coming from Quetzal, it's very, very interesting elements. Brazil had its route of exports to China, and since we finished the draft report and we have read in the report published in February, we are expecting to see which will be the role of China after the pandemic in terms of gas demand, and we'll see whether perhaps China will become a competitor of GLN gas in Europe. And as Brazil is a supplier of China, we could have there a clash in terms of oil and not in terms of gas. In case of Argentina, we can, regarding gas, well, there are chances there, but not in terms of exports, not yet. Argentina may have gas reserves, but it is not in a position to export gas, not yet. So therefore, I can see that Mexico and Brazil could redirect their oil flows to to the European Union if the EU so demands that. But that will never be the silver bullet that we need to replace Russian hydrocarbons. When we look at the front covers of papers, sometimes they are misleading. Because on the one hand, we say, okay, we see EU sanctions, but then it seems that the headlines say the opposite. So therefore, it is very important to read the text regarding sanctions. If we read about the package 5 of the EU, that is to say, restricting gas and oil, we need to look into the type of gas and oil that I'm referring to. Are we talking about the gas that is exported on maritime transportation, or perhaps through the pipeline and not GNL? So sometimes that misleading aspects, that sometimes when we give training, we are often asked that question. So we need to be clear, to need to specify that, and we really need to look into the source. The source are the very many publications of the EU and to find out about the actual sanctions that the EU has levied. And now let us move on to Q&A. Well, this question is addressed, even if it doesn't say that it is for you, Trevor. Any of the panelists may answer the question or may add to the answer, but the question goes as follows. Is it possible to price barrel oil in yuan, or what could be the impact in other markets?
I think the response is a simple one that yes, it's entirely possible. I think this is going to depend on agreements made between buyers and sellers, and we're seeing lots of activity there, lots of moves in that direction in China and with other countries as well. I think it'll take quite a long time, if it ever actually develops that way, before alternative currencies are in any way even close to the liquidity that we see the US dollar have. Because when you switch to these other forms of settling transactions, it does come with a higher cost and in already pretty sometimes low margin trades. And so the US dollar's got that strong position that is likely here to stay for some time.
Muchas gracias. Una pregunta.
Now a question addressed at Pablo Ahedo. potential impact of Latin American countries' exporters to China. What about China diverting exports to those countries? What could be the impact of it? This is precisely what I mentioned when we are talking about exporters and the countries that we have analyzed. We are talking about Mexico and Brazil. Brazil exports to China, and then, yes, of course, may be impacted by that. If we take a look at what the words of the executive director of International Energy Agency, China may have an excess of surplus need of gas and oil. So therefore, China may become a competitor, but well, there seems to be a trend in China to continue increasing that, especially now at the end of the restrictions due to COVID-19 pandemic. So this is a question which is not addressed at any of our panelists. It's about hydrogen and the role that hydrogen may play regarding competitiveness and, well, the type of hydrogen that should be promoted. Green hydrogen, pink hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and other alternative fuels. And the person who is asking the question sounds a bit skeptical. Is there higher hopes than reality in terms of hydrogen? I think that all the panelists could answer that question. So, starting off with Berta. Well, regarding hydrogen types, I mentioned that in my presentation. We want carbon neutrality. At the end of the day, we want costs to be reduced. There are very many alternatives. Well, we have water electrolysis hydrogen with electric power, whether it is nuclear or renewable, but that is to say that does not emit any CO2 at source. And hydrogen could also be generated from waste, and we also have the blue hydrogen, which follows a conventional process. Hydrogen that is produced is stored and can also be used for the production of other products. Well, depending on the final use, final purpose, they all be part of that mix. European Union is favoring electrolytic hydrogen from renewable sources. So the last place we had nuclear hydrogen that was promoted, that was pushed by France, but actually it is being pushed that it is a way of generating demand for that renewable energy. There will come a time where we will need additional demand for it to continue, for those technologies to continue to be deployed. Hope of reality. What I can say right now or to date is that those who are consuming and using hydrogen as the industry, fertilizing industry, methanol industry, as well as other industry. We are large producers as well as consumers as well as large producers of hydrogen. In the transition, those industry will play a key role in making that a reality. At this point in time, we are moving at a smaller scale. We are conducting tests, and there are already projects, 100 megawatts projects, that will take place in 2025, 2026 will help us test reliability of the technology and would also help us reduce costs, as now there is a significant gap between fossil hydrogen, renewable hydrogen. There is yet a long way to go in terms of technological developments and efficiency. So we all know that hydrogen is not a source of energy, as it does not exist in its free form on the planet. Needs to be extracted. Green hydrogen is electrolytic hydrogen that is produced from water, and then that hydrogen can be used to generate power when used with oxygen to produce water. So from the energy viewpoint, the process is really costly. We need more energy to generate that hydrogen than the energy that is produced whenever hydrogen is combined with oxygen. Yet we may not have any other choice but to use it as an energy vector. If we are moving towards electrification, greater electrification, I was about to say mainstream electrification, well, the problem that we find is that it is difficult to store. No static storage. That's where we do have pumping and double bottom reservoirs. It is very hard, very difficult to store energy in batteries. Significant developments have been made in batteries, yet batteries continue to have little energy units by unit of mass of biomass, and they are very heavy materials to store. So therefore, hydrogen as an energy vector may play a role, for instance, in the aviation sector, and perhaps also in vessel propulsion. I'm not sure whether we will have a role to play as hydrogen gas, because it is difficult to handle. It is combustible. The explosions that Fukushima accident or event were due or caused by the hydrogen that was released due to the high temperatures achieved in the core of the reactor. Yet it is an essential element for synthetic fuels. Hydrogen can play a role as an element or a component to manufacture renewable fuels, synthetic fuels, to be used in niche sectors where it would be otherwise very difficult to electrify. And, well, I'm referring to part of transportation needs here. So you would like to make a comment there? Yes, EU has shown interest in hydrogen, as Berta has said, is trendy. Yet EU is pushing hydrogen. So regarding Chapter 4 and the Caspian area, EU signed a memorandum of understanding with Kazakhstan in El Cairo summit they had last November or December for the development of a electrolytic hydrogen production plan, green hydrogen. As far as I know, there is a German company that is interested in that. The 40 or 50 billion investment were initially discussed. And to my mind, the problem of Caspian area is not the production. Well, they do have water and sun there, yet transportation could be a big challenge, especially we bear in mind that the Caspian area is a closed area, has no exits to the open sea, and transportation continues to be an unresolved problem. As long as, well, but by the time the problem will be resolved, we'll see how this project will progress. I'd like to add that the EU, as we can read on the chapter, when they developed the EU platform, that is to say the European Union platform seeking diversification, which is in line with Recap EU that was released in May, they look for energy efficiency, for energy saving, and diversification. And regarding diversification, regarding the use of clean energy, hydrogen touches upon those two elements. Regarding the EU platform, it's about where to find LNG and gas and hydrogen for the future. Hydrogen is topic is found on several places, and it is considered to be a top important topic. And To add to what Cayetano has mentioned, hydrogen does not exist in its free form. Well, with the case of use of hydrogen in fuel cells. Starting point is electricity that becomes hydrogen. Hydrogen then at the end of the day becomes electricity because the fuel cell at the end of the day is an electric engine. So therefore we should think about the performance of each of the processes of, yes, we could say that perhaps we could use hydrogen to reduce waste. So for instance, the benchmark of load where there are waste in terms of renewable energies. So having an inefficient system, as at the end of the day there is an overcapacity of renewable energy, so therefore the price becomes zero. Well, the price is zero, but the cost is, well, yes, we could also assume that the cost is zero, but at the end of the day, grounding competitiveness of an element, considering that the input used has zero price due to inefficiency of the system, this is dubious. And I do think that hydrogen will play a role at a given point in time as a fuel component. And as Cayetano rightly said, well, considering also the storage. So surely there will be other ways of storing hydrogen in the midterm, for instance, pumps and batteries. But there is a cost to that. That comes at a cost. In any case, well, Europe is setting out horizons. There are European initiatives, not only. Well, that is a question for Berta, actually. I will leave it for later on. Okay, I will stop here. Okay, I will finish here. I will add to what has been said here. When we talk about cost, we forget about distribution to the client, to the end user. That's oftentimes why hydrogen will be in an element of a fuel that will reach user. Well, the investment for the logistics to take it to the client is also being made. Okay, we should not forget about the whole chain up until the end user is reached. Europe is making proposals to create a hydrogen market. Well, we even don't know how to transport it. Well, perhaps a mix of hydrogen and methane will be transported, but that doesn't look like a radical breakthrough. We don't know how it will be transported. We know that pipelines have a challenge in transporting liquid hydrogen. So thinking about creation of hydrogen market in Europe, it is a bit it's unrealistic. And then if we think about capture and sequestration of CO2 to produce blue hydrogen, so the 4 pillars that have been put forward at the EU, notice that the scenario that they have proposed to achieve the stop the or for in terms of climate change and global warming, reforestation. Yes, that has been proposed. Well, everyone has thought about reforestation and also take into consideration greenhouse gases other than methane. So people are kind of confused as the pathway that I have put forward to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and the progress that we have made considering the energy policies that the countries that make up the COP conferences have put forward, we are seeing huge differences despite the optimistic approach of the World Energy Agency. Another question is about opinion about the French nuclear reactor and the weight in the generation of European energy. Well, I think that the question refers to the event that took place last year, where nearly half or over half of the French nuclear reactors were closed down, as they had to undergo a number of maintenance, and they also required some retrofit, and they had to be closed down, and they resolved that by buying energy from neighboring countries, more specifically Spain. Spain was a great importer of energy to France at that time. Spain often imports a bit of energy from France, but also exports some electricity to Morocco and Maghreb. And there is a balance there. And after that event, the nuclear reactors went back into operation. So nuclear power plants have a big problem. They are reaching the end of the life cycle. All of them are reaching the end of the life cycle simultaneously. They will all need to find a solution that requires making technical changes that are decided by the nuclear authorities in each of the countries. Many people thought that the nuclear power plants, due to the tradition they had in France, could be renewed with other nuclear plants. That is questioned. The life cycle of many of them will be extended, but I don't think that many new nuclear power plants will be built. So 3 EPR nuclear reactor is still under manufacturing in Flamanville. There are huge delays, huge budget increases, similar to what happened with Pilot 3 in Finland, which is the first case of third-generation nuclear reactor for France, which is giving headaches due to high costs and big delays. I think that the main problem is not about downtime, but what to do by the time all the nuclear power plants will reach the end of life cycle. Question for Felipe Sánchez Tapia. It is about Turkey. Geopolitical and energy challenges. About Turkey. Well, regarding Turkey, Turkey is a neighbor country. So Turkey, within the Caucasian area, has engaged into high-level partnership with Azerbaijan. They define themselves as a single nation, 2 states. They share language, so there are minor differences between their respective languages, and they have established a very close relationship, and in recent years they have accompanied each other due to the conflict in neighboring area. So, and they have an opposite relationship with Armenia due to historical reasons, Armenian genocide, and the actual Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Turkey has had the border with Armenia closed for many, many years. No diplomatic relationships existed for many years. The situation was very, very challenging. Regarding Georgia, the relationship is cordial. Actually, they have a tripartite relationship, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, which takes into consideration defense and the latest exercises that they have done are aimed at protecting the pipelines that go through Azerbaijan and Turkey. So Turkey has gained significant weight in recent years in the Caucasian areas, together with Azerbaijan and to the lower extent with Georgia. That clashes with the aspiration of Europeans, but not with all the Europeans, more specifically France. France is a country that has a close relationship with Armenia, and there has been big tensions between Turkey, France, and also the EU due to those reasons. There are also some potential for cooperation in terms of extension of the pipelines that we mentioned before, if EU wants to increase gas export from Azerbaijan. That would require, most likely, to increase the capacity of pipeline that goes through Panap. And as the Turkey government said, while there is space for cooperation there, Turkey wants to become an energy hub, distribution hub for energy resources, more specifically gas, to Europe. Therefore, there might be a space for cooperation there. In recent years, Turkey has had aggressive foreign policy, not only in the Mediterranean area, but also in the Black Sea area. And in the last 2 years, that has been reconducted since the arrival of Biden president, and has normalized relationships with neighboring countries, Armenia, EU, etc. Ukraine war has appeared as a help, as Turkey has positioned itself as a mediator between Ukraine, EU, Russians. Turkey is playing a significant role that has made it increase its geopolitical weight. And next Sunday, here we have the presidential elections in Turkey. According to polls, the president of Turkey is likely to be renewed. There will be 2 rounds of elections. If none of the candidates will get over more than 50% of the votes, there will be a second round of voting. And it's also an important thing to say about Turkey and the Caucasian area. The opposite candidate said that if he is chosen policy, he will restart the Silk Route. And so that has caused an immediate reaction, and we really need to watch closely to what will happen there if the government of Turkey changes as a result of the elections of next Sunday.
There's another question. I think it's viable. Do you think it's viable in the short term of, not using Russian LNG? I'm not quite sure the question. I'm not sure if anyone wants to answer this, because it's so we can do, not use it. Or I think the question is, should we can replace the Russian offer of LNG by something else, or another supplier, another country? I'm not quite sure what the question means, but I think in Spain, Europe, our question isn't liquid natural gas. So I'm not quite sure of the question. I don't know if whoever's written it, I don't know if anybody can make some sense of the question that we've received, or anyone wants to make a comment related to LNG. I really don't know the intention behind asking this question, so would anyone like to offer a clarification? Because we haven't been, we haven't really got a problem related to LNG from Russia. Well, I think maybe I have understood it, but I think basically there's no alternative to Russian LNG. What has increased we've bought more LNG from Norway, and more LNG has been bought from the United States and Canada, but they're not in conditions, well, I don't think at the moment, to replace the LNG that come from Russia. We can reduce the amount we buy from Russia, but I don't think we can replace it fully. Well, I'm not sure if it's more a more commercial question. Is it related to the prices? I'm not quite sure. But anyway, there has been a considerable reduction. And according to data from February, from the year 2023, the exports of LNG, or liquefied gas from Russia, but it's a very small amount. I think the data is 1.5 BCM, so it's a very minor amount. So I don't think it's an issue at all. So I think that would be easy to replace. So I think that's the only thing I could say with regard to this. I think it's an insignificant amount that we import of LNG from Russia. Okay, Berta. So what about the incentives related to the development of renewables in Europe compared to, I don't know, other places like the United States? Well, that's one of my favorite questions to answer. Well, the policies are very different. Here we're focusing everything on regulatory goals, specific goals, and we focus a lot on explaining so rather than having a specific amount of CO2 emissions, what we need to do is to see how it can be done rather than the exact amounts. And as far as aids, well, depending on the country in the European Union, they're very different. Germany, for example, offers a lot of incentives to synthetic production. In Spain, there is no subsidies related to renewables like biomethane and hydrogen. They've been excluded from all the different subsidies available. In the United States, the focus is completely different. They can't promote any initiative that is focused on this emissions reductions related to transport and other sectors. And it's technology, it's neutral. So there are lots of capture and storage programs for CO2 and sustainable fuels for aviation, and I think they're really taking off now. So I think it's more promoted in incentivating rather than to forbid. But now in Europe, we try to control rather than prohibit. So what we're asking is, can we have a framework that we can work for and develop different alternatives? Because everything changes so much that, it's very difficult for the regulators, for a regulator that has to write in real detail all the different directives without knowing on a daily basis what's happening to technology. It's very difficult for them. So the probabilities that they make a mistake or something isn't taken into account is very, very high. So we wanted to ensure that the emissions are reduced. But I think we need to have an open framework to exactly define how we can reduce the emissions. Thank you very much, Berta. This question is for Cayetano about whether it's possible to replace the weight that Russia has as far as the conversion and the enriching of nuclear energy. So we can include this in any of the sanctions that are being implemented. Everyone talks about the supply of Russian gas, but actually when we're talking about the nuclear energy, I think it's 40% of the nuclear fuel or nuclear energy. So we haven't, as far as I know, as far as sanctions, they haven't contemplated the nuclear energy. Well, the problem with the nuclear energy or enriched uranium, we don't need a continuous flow. In a nuclear power plant, when it's opened, you have fuel for 10 years approximately. And then the recharges are every year and a half, every 2 years, something like that. So you don't need a continuous flow. And so these sort of things are not seen as much. I think it would be very difficult to replace it because it's true that Russia is a very important player in the enriching of uranium. So when we're talking about the manufacture of the fundamental element for nuclear energy, so we've got a company which makes the nuclear fuel, but it imports the raw material, which is the enriched uranium. The main supplier is France, but Russia has a very important role there. Well, the question, what role should nuclear energy play in Spain? No. So, Cayetano, do you want to talk about this? Well, I think it depends a lot on several different things. To start, it depends on the geographical context. I think that in the Western world, the United States and Europe, the future of nuclear energy is relatively limited. And I think that it is reduced to the energy transition period. During the energy transition period, it's fundamental to maintain this type of power plants. But of course, once we expand, I'm not sure when, the generation systems for renewable energies, etc. Well, of course, it will be it will be reduced even further. But of course, China, India, and the Western Europe, they continue to build nuclear power plants. And I think that nuclear energy there has a horizon that is a more long-term, with a more long-term view. And in the future, on the much longer term, I don't know. But as Kane said, for the future, everything is based on calculations. I agree with Cayetano. Well, I think when we talk about the future of the role of nuclear energy, we have to make a difference between, as you said, the countries. And this is very important, which is there are two countries that have changed their strategy to reduce the nuclear weight, which is South Korea and Japan. They had reduced it, and now they've changed their policy. But it's true to say that in Europe, except France, for obvious reasons of industrial policies in France, because they have a lot of nuclear energy. So they're talking about first of the canned reactors. Well, we're talking about the tariff, which is related to the French technology for the next 35 years, like Flamanville, as an example. The current prices, the wholesale prices for electricity are low, but we have a long-term view. It's an amazing amount. So maybe this has to be changed. So Flamanville, I think they have, obviously the price, the tariff in France is completely out of the market, but the third generation only makes sense. It's in countries like France because of their nuclear policies. And what about the other countries that have nuclear weapons? So, you know, to have nuclear power plants and then you have nuclear weapons, well, it's very questionable. So, anyway, to develop, well, actually for Spain, third generation reactors make no sense whatsoever. If the French actually manage to have the cost that they say they have, like Finland, for example, well, fantastic, because they said, right, you tell me that in 60 years you're going to have an average price of 20 euros megawatt hour. Well, then, of course, then we will do, you know, change and use that sort of energy. But those who have invested in that, well, they did very well because all the risk related to the deviation in price, etc., is the responsibility of the French. But regardless, it's very questionable this will actually happen. So when the French say one thing and then we have the Chinese say they're going to have 5 megawatts a year, well, if they do that, they're gigawatts a year, then they'll be able to change that. But anyway, the increase in the lifespan of the second generation power plants, well, that's going to be around 40 years. So if there are no security problems, it makes sense. And in fact, in the United States, of the 93 reactors they have, 88 have been given a license to go from up to 60 years of lifespan. So extending the life of 40 to 50 years, well, from the cost standpoint, well, I can't remember the name of the document that backs this up, but they were talking about the different costs of all the different generation prices. They think that the cost associated to extending the life for 10 or 20 years of these nuclear power plants, I think the cost will be between 30, 40 euros megawatt hour. With that cost, it's highly competitive with any alternative renewable energy. So therefore, you have to add to that. And when we're talking about the French, to substitute one technology with a 90% of reliability to other factors, where this has a backup cost, well, the French, they are trying to balance the different alternatives when we talk about these load factors. So when we talk about extending the life of these power plants, it's highly competitive. Also, we have to take into account that the alternatives isn't just nuclear, it can be gas. So there's a factor that needs to be taken into account, and which is an environmental factor. Anyway, as far as it concerns us, we should have to think about using third-generation nuclear reactors. I really don't think, as far as we're concerned, it makes any sense whatsoever. One thing is France and all the countries that have got nuclear weapons, and the Japanese and the Koreans. Well, if they have three-generation reactors and the price is between 50 and 60 euros megawatts hour, well, nobody knows how they actually get this cost, or this, we don't know whether it's realistic. Even the Chinese say it's about 60. So they think the cost will be about 60 euros megawatt hour. And no one can explain how the same technologies has one price for the Japanese and it's viable, and it isn't for the French. So, and it says that the Chinese are actually copying the French technology. So it makes no sense whatsoever. Well, anyway, I think I think we've managed to cover all the questions.
No, creo que ya no queda ninguna.
Yes, I don't think we have any questions left. So thank you very much, Trevor, for being there in Calgary, listening to us, thousands of kilometers away, and we're glad that you could follow our debate. Well, and what's the time there in Calgary? What's your local time? So we're very grateful. I don't know if it's the middle of the night or you had to get up at very early time, or maybe you're going to go to bed now, Trevor. So anyway, regardless, thank you very much.
Here to join you today. It's about 4 a.m.
Oh.
Bueno.
Wow, they're saying. Well, it would have been better not to go to bed at all, rather than going out on the town and then listening to us. Everyone in the room is laughing. Anyway, thank you all very much for your attention today. And as I say, you will all have access to the hard copy version of our report. Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos.
Well, thank you all very much for being here yet another year. I would like to remind you that you get a hard copy. So, as we say, you get a hard copy as you leave the room, or you can download it from our website. And we have a coffee outside where we can do some networking. Well, thank you all very much. I'd like to especially thank 3 people, both from the Institute and the Repsol team and Enerclub, because it will be impossible to mention everybody's name. But I want to make 3 special mentions. One from the Coronel Vicente And as I say, yet again, thanks to Enerclub and Repsol and the people representing them for having organised this event and helping us with the drafting of this report. Thank you.